Welcome to the Revolution Church podcast.
I don't know what's going on with the camera today. That should be fine. We're good. So we've got a lot of, can you hear me okay? Hopefully you can hear me. We've got a lot to cover today. This Galatians study has ended up being quite the long study. Test 1 2 1 2. Hey everybody. It's just been a week. I've been parenting all week long, and I'm tired. And oh goodness, all sorts of crazy stuff's happening. So anyhow, thanks for joining me. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to wherever you are. Let me grab my notes here. So we are in Galatians 3, which, we're not in Galatians 3. This is part 3 of the study. We're still in 2. Let me grab that. It's funny because I did my studies in another Bible, and then I grabbed this one, and I probably should have grabbed the other one, but that's okay. There it is. So I didn't even underline anything in this one because this is a new Bible I'm using. Let's see. I think we can get there. I think we can get halfway through 2 today because I've been getting a lot of information on the old Galatians. Now listen, one of the things I wanted to ask you guys is please don't forget to like and subscribe. But I think, I don't know if you have to join YouTube to like and subscribe. Sure would be worth it to us if you did. It's helpful if you like what we're doing and you subscribe to what we're doing and you turn on the notices in case we do any surprise stuff during the week, and also just remind you when service is starting. So yeah, all that stuff helps, and it helps by liking these talks. It helps YouTube put us in the rotation more, so that helps, and we can use that help. So if you can like our things, yes, please do. And maybe sign up to YouTube so you can help get Revolution out there more. That's other ways you can help. I just put out a Instagram message and a Facebook message the other day, letting folks know that we are going to try to raise the goal. Our goal is for the year is $75,000 for 2024. And you go, what can you do with that? Well, we can do a lot more. We pretty much double our budget from last year. And to be honest with you, it gets kind of tough doing this. It's just me and Josh, and Josh is volunteering, and he's got a full-time job. I'm looking for a part-time job, and it kind of gets tough being the only person, just 2 of us. And not being able to do much more because you're just doing everything to the max, trying to get all the studying in, and put the posts up and get everything released on time. So it would be nice to have some wiggle room in what we're in our work. So that's our goal, $75,000. It seems crazy. But also, funny thing is working on a documentary about my parents. We just showed the first 2 episodes at Sundance, which was really cool. You know, it's so weird that like my folks could raise, like my dad would raise that much money in a day. But even back in the day at Revolution, when we were in Atlanta, we used to have one supporter who gave that. It was actually like a foundation that gave us that, until we started talking about stuff they didn't like, and then they pulled their support. But yeah, we could use your support. We've been doing this for 30 years. I want to do it for longer, and want to do more, and want to grow, and have someone we can hire to help us with all this stuff, make everything move a little bit smoother. So that would be grateful. That's what we're doing, revolutionchurch.com. You can check that out. I'm just letting you know. And if you share that stuff, that helps too. I know it's weird. Like, I don't want to share a church asking for money. So I don't know how else to do it at this point. So there you go. That's been the adventure. You know, it's funny. Back in the day before emails and stuff, believe it or not, I remember that time. And I also was very late subscriber to emails. You would get letters from people, and they'd get these really, you know, friendly letters, you know, and then you get one negative one, one bad one, you know, and it would be like for every 5 nice letters, you'd get one bad one. Of course, that one bad one would always outshine the good ones. And what I've realized now, since it's easier to like send messages and stuff, it often feels like I get like 50 bad ones and 1 good one. And so what I've been trying to recently do is trying to focus on the positive one, and let that take over again. Like, let the 50 bad ones be outshined by the good ones. And, you know, that's the new goal. So here we are in the book of Galatians. A lot going on. We've got, the book of Galatians is, like I've said before, it's a letter to Galatians. They are completely separated. Yeah, well, someone's come in and caused separation in the community. So the Gauls and the Jewish Christians have started to fight over religious customs and circumcision and all this stuff. So they're starting to separate a little bit. One of the other things that's happening here, yeah, and Paul's, whoever these leaders are questioning Paul's authority as a apostle, and as a speaker, and as someone who can say grace alone. And they've accused him of tickling ears and all this stuff. So that's happening. So this letter to the Galatians is Paul trying to bring a divided community together. Also trying to reassert himself as a leader into that community, and saying, hey, you know, let's remember what this community was like. Let's remember how we all worked together. You know, let's talk a little bit more about this clear. And we've done this, I guess, every year for probably 4 or 5 years now. And before that, I was going through Galatians so much, I realized I had to set it to like once a year, because otherwise we'd never stop doing Galatians. So that's why it's the beginning of every year, so I can remember. And it's kind of created a tradition. And after this one, we'll go into Tillich's You Are Accepted, because I think that's a very important talk, and we're going to look at that as well. And then I think we're going to do Dr. King's Dr. King talk sermon after that, and because I think that's just like let's hit it with grace, justice, you know, all this really cool stuff. So that would be great. So here we are. We've made it to Galatians 2. It's so funny because usually we just blow through Galatians 1, but some of the new study resources I've been using, and I've been studying more scholarship than just theology or like, you know, commentaries, but really deep scholarship. And it's really dissecting that dissects this book, and it's really kind of beautiful, and it's even making it like see things that I've not seen before, or really highlight those things. So here we are. Paul had just talked about that the fact that he persecuted Christians, that he persecuted people for following this way. So he's almost foreshadowing and saying like, okay, I used to be like these people who are troubling you. And I like the foreshadowing he does a lot in this book, which I hadn't noticed, I don't think, before, is he's always kind of like, I was like this, let me show you other people, let me show you how these troublemakers work. Let me show you how this is. And so it's really interesting to me. And so he talks about that, and then he says, but then I turned and became a Christian. And it's funny because so many people don't like Paul. And I think Paul is one of the most misunderstood writers in the New Testament. There's people who are like, oh, I'm a red letter Christian, or I just don't listen to Paul. And I think you can't really cut Paul out because Paul's about grace. Another interesting thing about Paul is Paul never mentions hell, So Paul has that clobber scripture in Romans 1 that everybody uses, but you got to read Romans 2 as well. And you also have to read it within proper context as well. But besides that, Paul teaches us a lot about grace, a lot about unconditional love, a lot about forgiveness, a lot about restoration. And we have such a lack of that in the church. And it's strange because like the conservatives often cling to things like the pastoral epistles, which were actually written by Paul. It's like reactionary Paul. It's like somebody thought Paul was too graceful, so they did these books. And so then you got everybody fighting this situation with Paul. And then you got the progressives saying, oh, we don't want to read Paul because he's a chauvinist and blah, blah, blah. It's like, folks, it's time to wake up and realize that Paul lived 2,000 years ago in the Middle East. Compared to most people, no, he was not, a male chauvinist or this or that or homophobic. They didn't even know what homosexual was, or he maybe knew it, a little bit, but they didn't have a concept of sexuality at that time. Those weren't things that were happening. And it's just really funny how we try to take these ideas from our time and put them onto these authors, and oh, they were this way and they were that way. And it's like, no, things were very different then. And so if you think of a Middle Eastern culture 2,000 years ago, Paul was quite progressive, if you will, quite ahead of his time. And the faith that it pushed him to come to that point. So, wow, right? So I want to encourage people to just wake up. Like the Apostle Paul you need to read it. Don't read the pastoral epistles. Those aren't Paul. Those are fake Paul, because Paul preached so much grace that someone felt like it was too loosey-goosey, Why would Paul go from there's no male, no female to all of a sudden the man runs and it sets up this hierarchy of structure when he's been doing nothing but tearing down hierarchy. And we're going to see that today as well when we look into this Galatians 2. So here we are. So again, he goes, then after 14 years, I went up again to Jerusalem with Barnabas, taking Titus along with me. I went up in response to a revelation that I had laid before them, though only a private meeting with the acknowledged leaders, the gospel that I proclaimed among the Gentiles, in order to make sure that I was not running or had not run in vain. So one of the things that's happening here is Paul recently just, here earlier said, God has no favorites, all that stuff. And, he's no respecter of, and I think I'll get into that a little bit more. But he's no respecter of men's hierarchy or status. Paul didn't care about status, but unfortunately others did. So he needed to talk to the pillars, the disciples and people like that, to talk about his work and get the approval of them so others would respect his work. And so it's really interesting how that works. Like you kind of get in the system. It's like late stage capitalism. We're all kind of stuck in it. We all have to work through it. We all have to kind of move and sweep and see how it works, and remember that none of this stuff that they're trying to sell us is going to fill the lack, because the lack is always the lack. That's why it's called the lack, and you can't fill the lack. It's not a God-shaped hole, because God's not going to fill the lack, and a new Amazon purchase isn't going to fill the lack. A new car is not going to fill the lack. A new partner is not going to fill the lack. Nothing. The lack is something that we have to learn to live with. So Paul had to also learn to live with, I need to go and have these approvals so others will respect the work that I'm doing. And so people won't, the race that I'm running won't be in vain. And so he wanted his work to be respected. He didn't want his work to be shut down, because he knew that if the elders, if the pillars, if the disciples, those who were with Christ did not give it the seal of approval, that would affect his work. So he goes up, and then he goes, but even Titus, who was with me, was not compelled to be circumcised, though he was Greek, but because of false believers secretly brought in, who slipped in to spy on our freedom we have in Christ Jesus, so that they might enslave us. But we did not even submit to them for a moment, so that the truth with the gospel might always remain with you. Now, one of the things it's interesting about this is, because I used to always think that when they said, well, my partner here, Titus, wouldn't have been actually, demanded because someone snuck in and noticed our freedoms. I always thought like maybe they snuck into like the bathhouse or something and saw that he wasn't uncircumcised. I've always had a kind of a literal brain that worked that way. But more than likely, this is what he was bringing to the pillars of the community, to the disciples, and coming to them about this and saying, hey, we want to preach to the uncircumcised. We also want to tell them that they don't need to be circumcised. And I think the idea here is that there were people amongst the leadership who came in to push back. People amongst the leadership who either snuck in or were there and was like, how dare he? There was a division in the leadership. And so saying, oh, no, we don't recognize that, and his Greek partner isn't even circumcised and needs to be circumcised. And that all probably came through Paul bringing that to the disciples and saying, this is what. So Paul is really trying to sit here and say, and he's like, hey, you guys reach Jews for Christ. You're Jewish Christians, and you go into the Jerusalem and you do all this. I want to go all outside of Jerusalem where there's all these Gentiles, and I want to reach Gentiles. But we don't want to pressure Gentiles to feel like they have to, convert to Judaism and do the practice of Judaism in order to get to Christ. Like there's not a mediator to Christ. Like it's just Christ, And so that's what Paul's saying. And so Paul is also foreshadowing again that, hey, it's not the first time I've dealt with people like this. It's not the first time I'm not the first time I've dealt with people who've tried to oppress me or tell me that I have to do certain things or accuse my friends and say that my friends have to be a certain way in order to be Christ followers. Like he's trying to say, like, this happened when I was, he's always killing two birds with one stone, because he's going, this is when the disciples gave me like the seal of approval. And it's also, there were these types who were what the critics here were called Judaizers. There were these types of folks who were amongst us even then, trying to pressure us. And, he's given a dig on them because it's really false brethren. It's not false siblings. It's not, is what he's saying, but they brought in, slipped in. False believers is what the NRSV, but it says false brothers and sisters. Like they weren't family, they weren't community, they weren't a part of the community, or they're pretending to be a part of the community only to sow discord. And how often do we have that type of discord today? I would probably be seeing like that with a lot of people who don't include LGBTQ folks, or who believe that there's hell, that eternal damnation that's going to torture people forever. Some people would probably see me as a troublemaker that way. For me, I see that we've rebuilt a system. We've rebuilt the law just in different ways. And so we have different things that we tell people like, well, if you really want to be a Christian, you got to think this way, you got to vote this thing, or you got to do this, or you got to do that. And all of a sudden grace isn't sufficient. It's now it becomes about works, and it becomes about judgment, and it becomes about pressure, and it becomes about politics, and it becomes like, our politicians are more gods than, if you think about it, most people interpret their theology through their political beliefs sometimes than they do vice versa, like their theology and then come to political beliefs. Because a lot of it doesn't add up and it doesn't make sense. But I guess really you can make the Bible say what you want if you negotiate it within the way you would like to, or if you were raised a particular way, or if you read it in like a very literal sixth grade level, that can happen as well, I guess. So it goes, we did not submit to those even for a moment, so that the truth of the gospel might always remain with you. And so Paul's constantly standing saying, I'm not going to submit. I'm not going to get in. I'm not, it's like Martin Luther when he said, I cannot recant. He's like, we're not going to let these folks in. We're not giving, we are shutting them down. We're standing up because the gospel is important. And this is not forcing people to follow traditions and holidays and things like that is not the gospel, period. It's rebuilding another system. It's another good news, or you're rebuilding the law. And that's what Paul's arguing here. And Paul's also now showing that he's been given the seal of approval, like I said, by the disciples. And he's also showing, like, this isn't my first rodeo. I've had people come in and try to push their agenda and try to push circumcision, ever since I've been doing this. Now, this is where it gets really cool. And from those who were supposed to be acknowledged leaders, what actually were makes no difference to me. God shows no partiality. Those leaders contributed nothing to me. On the contrary, when they saw that I had been entrusted with the gospel for the uncircumcised, just as Peter had been entrusted with the gospel for the circumcised, for who worked through Peter, making him an apostle, the circumcision also works through me, sending me out to the Gentiles. And when James and Cephas and John were all the knowledge pillars, recognized me, grace, they had been given me the right hand of Barnabas, the right hand of fellowship. But I want to go back up to 7. This is why I'm kind of rambling here. Up to 6, and those who were supposed to be acknowledged leaders. And then he follows and says, what they actually were makes no difference to me. What's really, really, really interesting here is Paul, when Paul said, I'm not impressed with the status of leaders. And even though this is like society's rules, like this is tradition, this is regulation, one of the things I noticed a lot, like hierarchy, there's always hierarchy. We in work and things, you have a boss you work for, people who are. And it's even funny, like when I was at the film festival, you could tell like the hierarchy was the people who were more famous or the producers who were more successful, and it's funny because they even expect to be talked to a certain way, looked at a certain way. Like, because I would just kind of say what I thought to people, like to producers and people like that who were standing around. And then they would act shocked by the most mundane thing, like, oh, how dare I can't believe it, and it was like, oh, you're just not used to people telling you the truth. You're not used to people pushing back. You see that a lot in church as well, where this kind of hierarchy that gets set up, and it's this power structure. And Paul says, I have no respect for this power structure because God has no particulars, has no favorites. We should be treating each other as equals. And you will find a lot of people don't like that. They don't like it. If they've worked for their whole life and they've become successful, even if you don't work for them, they expect to be treated a certain way. And if you don't treat them the way that they want to be treated, they will cut you out or they will talk down to you. They'll move the goalpost often. You'll be like, okay, well then I'll try to talk your language. But if you don't talk it in the right way, they move it around. And so, you've got Paul doing something that's quite, for me, seems kind of punk rock in a way, but it's also very, very part of the Jewish tradition. To not really, some of the Jewish tradition, not all of it, but some of the Jewish tradition, to also say, well, God sees all people equally and not have this kind of hierarchy thing. But here's the thing, is when this book was written, let's talk about context for a minute. Ancient Mediterranean society heavily emphasized social status. Class distinction was seen as crucial, and how people related to each other. I mean, it was just class status, children, women, men, and then this class status that always sometimes didn't even come with finances. It came with like different influence or different family things or things like that, because really everybody was really poor at this time, especially in an occupied territory. But this class status was seen as very relevant. And what you'll notice is Paul is constantly kicking against the class status. And he will, just when we get to it, whenever we get to it, neither male nor female, Jew nor Gentile. It's funny because I always get people who feel like, oh, well, my identity is this or my identity is this, and they don't like it, And it's usually people who've been discriminated against, But I'm like, you don't understand, like. This, when he's saying this, he's trying to dismantle this hierarchy, but he's also trying to dismantle the lowarchy. There's no hierarchy of suffering. We're all one. And so you've got the Apostle Paul, like I was trying to say again the other day, is like 2,000 years Middle Eastern culture, who's saying, I'm not going to obey the Mediterranean society. I don't care that it's heavily influenced by class separation or class distinction where is seen crucial here, and this is how we relate to each other. For me, it's not, and it's interesting because a lot of philosophers at that time also disagreed with this status type of separation, this class distinction. And the Stoics were very indifferent about it, and also interesting is that the Gentiles, a lot of the Gentiles respected the philosophers, who also disdained that way of seeing status, at least within thought, if not completely living that way. So here you have the Apostle Paul saying, Peter's status is, he walked with Jesus. It doesn't really matter to me. I'm here because it matters more to the people I'm working with, because it helps me run my race well. It keeps me doing this. Peter, great guy, I'm sure, but God has no favorites. There is no partiality. There is no class separation. There is no curtain that when you go into coach, Paul said, no, we burn that. There's no first class. There's no second class. There's no third class. And that's really interesting to me because we talked about this a few weeks ago, how Christians often fall into that with big donors or big things, where I want to be, next to powerful people, or if all of a sudden the famous person's preaching, you're going, well, they just got saved and now they're preaching. What's going on? It's like this intoxicating class distinction of I want to be near important people. And it's strange because we all kind of have to play this game at times, like when I went to the film festival and all this, and I was like, there's certain things you have to say and you have to do because you want to see the film sell, you want to do this, but you also, push back, but you can't push back too much. You got, and you go like, ugh, because you got to look at the greater good and what you want to do it for the greater good. But at the same time, you're just like, when are we going to realize we're just human beings, that none of us are, more important than each other, and that we all play a part, and all these parts are equally important to get us to where we need to be. But sometimes we have to go get the right hand of fellowship. Sometimes we need to go get that approval from the right person so we can do our work. Write those books or get people to subscribe and like our talks, or raise funds or do things like that. That's not the road I've taken. I've taken the road less traveled, and honestly, it's a tougher road. It would be easier if I compromised more, and if I really was trying to please people with open wallets. But I can't do it. I don't even like asking people for money, much less trying to play to their desires. But it's like for important, like when you write a book, they're always like, "Hey Jay, you got to get some quotes. You got to get some quotes for the book." I'm like, okay. My neighbor Bob can do it. Like, no, we need important people. We need important people. So, could you get Rob Bell to say something about your book? I'm like, I don't know Rob Bell, but well, I've met him a few times, but I don't really know him. Well, if we could get Rob Bell or Brian McLaren or someone who's popular, at the time, and maybe a celebrity, maybe a member of a rock band, I remember I wanted Brennan Manning to write the foreword of my first book, and they were like, well, we know who he is, but how about Johnny Cash? It was always like they always wanted to, and I was like, well, that would be awesome. It didn't happen, obviously, but you've got to get important people to like you so you can sell the book, and so other people go like, oh, we want someone important, someone talented, someone with charisma likes this guy, so he must have charisma. And it's funny because I wrote down important people like me, but it's funny because it's like important people like me, and then it's also important people like me, because eventually that's what you're aiming for, is to be, I want to be important, I want to be influential. But you want to also stay human and humble and things like that. And I think that was one of the things I always looked up to my mom, is that she was just comfortable wherever she was, If we were at Applebee's, or if she was at like some big movie premiere, and she'd always meet like the funniest people, and like she would be impressed by people who were like stars years ago rather than people who were like, she like met Slash, and she's like, it was at this thing for Guns N' Roses guitarist years and years ago. And because I only knew it because I saw a picture of Slash sitting near her. She's like, honey, you won't believe who I met at this thing. And I'm like, you met Slash? And she's like, no. I met MC Hammer. And MC Hammer was a bit past his most popular time. But to my mom, that was the coolest thing, because she just remembered Too Legit to Quit, and You Got to Pray, and all that stuff. Total mom move, right? But she was also just as happy to be, like I said, like at Applebee's or at the mall or at TJ Maxx or at Target. We probably had more fun there than the fancy things that she got invited to every now and then. So I think that's an interesting thing. As far as just like this need to play up into this class situation. So to me, what I'm trying to say is like, respect everybody, show grace to everybody as you can. And when you're not showing favoritism to those in power or those in wealth or those who, it gets a little bit easier over time to speak truth to power. The problem is power doesn't usually like truth that doesn't go along with its power, and doesn't like to be questioned. And that's the problem. And that's why we talk about disagreeing well and arguing well here, is because, it's important that we have tough conversations. And that's what I loved about Dr. King, is he would sit down and talk to people like Bull Connor, who completely disrespected him and hated him and wanted him dead, and these other folks, and he would sit in a room with them, and he would talk to them, and he would show them the respect that they would not show him. He was always the bigger man, and he knew that God had no favors. And there they thought they were favorites because their skin, of the color of their skin, and because they were a police officer, or because they were a judge, or whatever. But Dr. King went in there and was able to have honest conversations. And those conversations at the time may have not changed anything at that moment, which it did. There were things that changed, but it also continued to change things years and years to come, because he knew how to disagree well. He knew how to force people to recognize his humanity. in a really beautiful way. My fail thing is I think sometimes I get a little defensive around people who are on a power trip. And when you get defensive, that's not the best way to communicate, because then you start kind of poking and prodding to see what you can get out of it. And I have to make sure that I'm not like giving people a hard time. So there's that. So let's jump back into what's going on here. God shows no partiality. Those leaders contributed nothing to me. On the contrary, oh yeah, we read that. And when James and Cephas, John, were acknowledged pillars, recognized the grace that had been given to me, they gave Barnabas and me the right hand of fellowship, which we talked about, agreeing that we should go to the Gentiles, the only to the Gentiles and to the go to the Gentiles and to the circumcised. They asked only one thing, that we remember the poor, which was actually what I was eager to do. This often can be poor of spirit. This often can be communicated as a certain group of people, but also those who have who are actually poor financially. And Paul said, yes, we were eager to do that, and that was the only thing they added. And he's like going like, and we were already doing that anyway. I like Paul. I like how Paul struggles a little bit. I like the humanity of Paul. I think there's something really inspiring about that. So listen to this, though. But when Cephas came to Antioch, I opposed him to his face because he stood self-condemned. Now Cephas is someone who Paul had worked with, someone that the Galatians would know, one of Paul's people, and they would know. And he goes, and this is how he starts out. He just cuts from this whole thing of like, I was eager to help the poor. And then when Cephas, he just goes into this automatic rebuke about Cephas. But when Cephas came to Antioch, and I opposed him to his face because he stood in self-condemned. For until certain people came from James, he used to eat with Gentiles. But after that, he came and drew back and kept himself separate for fear of the circumcision faction. And the others Jews joined him in the hypocrisy, so that even Barnabas, that's what I mean, Barnabas, Cephas, we're talking about Paul. Paul is talking about Peter. But here, Barnabas, which was who they would know, one of Paul's companions, was led astray by their hypocrisy. But when I saw that they were not acting consistently to the truth of the gospel, I said, Cephas, before them all, if you, though a Jew, like a Gentile, and not like a Jew, how can you compel Gentiles to live like Jews? So Cephas is Peter. I'm sorry. I got my names right. My Cephas and my Barnabas mixed up. But let's read that again, because I'm going to put my notes down, because I think they're getting in the way for a second. So he makes it clear, once again, he's gone through this whole thing of no respecter of men, and then he goes to this point where he goes, when I was in Antioch, Peter wasn't living the same thing he preached. Now, why is this interesting? Well, if you think about why this is so important, here he is, Paul is rebuking Peter for not sitting with Gentiles and only sitting with Jews. Now, I'm guessing Peter's doing this because he probably is tired of the grief that he gets, and probably just trying to be either like a people pleaser or just trying to keep the peace. You know how sometimes we just go, we'll just do this and it'll make everything easier. And Paul didn't like that. And what Paul really didn't like is Barnabas, who the Gentiles would know. So now, again, Paul is foreshadowing, saying, even Peter has fallen into this temptation. So in a way, he's saying, all fall short of God's standard, but yet God in his gracious kindness declares us not guilty. But I had to confront him to his face, and that's pretty big. And there's so many reasons why this is important. Another reason this is important is because here he is with Peter, and if you think about Jesus, when Jesus was sitting with tax collectors and prostitutes, notorious sinners, and it said even eating with them, and the leaders, the Pharisees at the time said, why does Jesus eat with such, why does he eat with these lawbreakers, or why does he eat with such scum, as the New Living says? And that's when Jesus turned around and said, hey, I'm here for these folks. These are my people. you know. Also, another thing that we don't realize is, as modern readers, we will struggle, just as we would struggle to understand how the class distinction, which is a little bit easier for us to understand because we see it all day, all long. We see class distinction. But another thing that would be hard for us, as for us modern readers, especially Western modern readers, is we struggle to understand how seriously most people in antiquity took the matter of food and table fellowship. So, you've got to remember, like, you were building a covenant with someone when you were sitting down. You were building a friendship with someone when you shared a meal together. That's why sometimes in the Old Testament, you'll see that the people would bring their own food and their own drink because they didn't want to have this table fellowship. So to have this table fellowship was to be bonded. To deny this with others was to say, I don't want this friendship. I do not want, if enemies came together and they did dine together, they were no longer enemies. They were coming together. And this was extremely important. It wasn't like all of us going out to eat or just somebody inviting somebody over for dinner. This was, getting someone's name tattooed on your neck or something. This was, we will ride and die together. We are family. We are together. We are community. To share a meal and then to share the Lord's Supper together. Even more powerful. And so this is why Paul is so upset, because he's going like, this is the message you're sending. Now Barnabas, who said these were his friends, is now not dining with his friends. And I think, like, if any of you remember high school or went to a big public school, you could remember sometimes how we would all be separated by either like what you're into, or by race, or by music, or by, popularity, all that status, all that separation, and we just continue to create that over and over again. So when you say, well, I'm a follower of Jesus, you're saying I will build covenant with all people, and I will eat at all the tables, and we will join together, and we'll eat with those who people don't think we should eat with, and you will become extremely inclusive. So for me, when I see Christianity as exclusive, as this exclusive thing, which really after the first 500 years, you started to see Christianity become more exclusive and things like that. I think when Constantine and people like that come in, you start to see Christianity turn into something that Christianity I don't think ever was meant to be. Unfortunately, now we have about 1,500 years of that type of tradition of this kind of exclusive thing, and these ideas that we aren't comfortable dismantling, but there's some of us who are saying we've got to dismantle this, and we've got to get back to these original thoughts and these ideas where we're saying we rebuke people for not being inclusive, and that we're not, but there's always room for reconciliation. See, that's the problem, is sometimes we rebuke people, oh, these people are bad, and we're not going for reconciliation. And reconciliation always needs to be a constant. Again, that's why we argue well. That's why we disagree well, because restoration and reconciliation is always got to be part of the conversation. People say, well, I don't want them. They didn't recognize it. It's too late, and you go, well, that's not how you build a movement, folks. You want as many people as you can. And with Christianity, it's all about forgiveness, and it's all about grace. And guess what? You don't get to decide who gets grace, because everybody gets grace. And that's why I always say grace is like anarchy. It doesn't go to any system. We can't put... And then, I said that the other day on Facebook, and someone was like, whosoever will. And so they try to make it like, well, you have to receive. There's some traditions you have to accept the gift. The other tradition you have to receive the gift. And I guess my tradition is like, you have it. Either you acknowledge it or not, it's there. It was given to you. That's it. A friend of mine was writing something like, oh, I went down to Utah and the Mormons saved me. And I was like, I said, that's too late. That happened to you a long time ago. Now, this is a person who doesn't believe in God or anything. But to me, I'm just trying to say, well, my theology says everybody's in. You are accepted. And we'll read a little bit about Tillich says about that, and we'll also probably read a little bit of Carlton Pearson's works this year as well, and we'll talk a little bit more about why I believe that is an important part of this. So, this table fellowship is very important. Like I said, Peter probably had his reasons, but not good ones. He was either trying to be a people pleaser or trying to avoid a headache or something like that, and Paul was going like, Well, it's not doing that. It's actually causing people who know better it's leading them astray. It's causing them to be more exclusive. It's causing them not to love people that much, And I think you see a lot of this in like, I think the Jesus movement. You had these hippies who were like loving everybody and doing all this stuff. And then all of a sudden they started to become really conservative and they decided who's in and out. And then, but you also see this in the progressive movement is you say, oh, well, we don't welcome conservatives here, or this person's wrong, or this person's bad, or, you see Christians talking about believing in cancel culture and things like that. And grace has no room for that either. So grace doesn't have room for either side. And this is why Paul's trying to say we all have to come together. Judaizers, Gentiles, the Gauls, and the Christian Jews. You guys, you've got to become one as a community, or you're going to destroy each other. And this is why he's having to remind the pillar that Jesus said, Peter, you are my rock. I mean, Paul sees that and going, hey, you hung out with the guy. You ate with them sinners. You ate with the wrong people. You got to continue to do that. Look what you're doing. You're leading others astray by not taking this important moment. And could you imagine if that's what we had to do? Like if it was just sitting down and sharing a meal with people to show we included, we were family, how awesome that would be to be able to be like, you'd have all these dinner churches, maybe. With everybody. Everybody's welcome. You always see that, and you never know. It's like, well, what do they mean, welcome? Do they mean I'm welcome and then I've got to change? But this table of fellowship was open. So you've got, what do we look here? We've got, think about Mark 2:17 again. I would say check that out, Mark 2:17. I think it's 15 through 17 where Jesus is being condemned for the people he eats with. You've got Peter trying to probably avoid some sort of criticism. Paul is pointing out the Barabbas to the Galatians because the Galatians probably knew Barabbas, and Barabbas was probably one of the reasons who helped bring this inclusion message to Galatians to the Gauls with Paul himself. And so he's going like, man, even Barnabas. So, sucks to be Barnabas, huh? And it's not that Peter is such a hypocrite, but he's kind of being a hypocrite because he's doing different than what he knew to be true and causing others to do so. And this is something I had not thought about either. Last year when I taught it, I said, we don't find out how it ends. Paul doesn't tell us the end of the story. But this is something that I was reading, is that there's a good chance that even this story in Antioch was told to the Galatians from the people who are coming in saying, you've got to be circumcised, you got to do this. They may have come in and said, well, listen, Peter's not eating with Gentiles that aren't circumcised, even Barnabas, your friend Barnabas isn't doing this. So why, you shouldn't be doing this either. And that the fact that Paul is maybe coming in and saying, hey, I was there as well, and I rebuked Peter face to face. So he may be using their very same stories against them to say, no dice. Like, this is still the message. It doesn't matter if I preach a different message. It doesn't matter if Peter preaches it. It doesn't matter if an angel from heaven comes down and preaches a different message. The message is grace. The message is we don't return to the law, And so that's really great. And so what you have here is you've got this thing where you see the Apostle Paul encouraging us to be no respecters of status. If you're at work, I would recommend doing that. Just keep your job so we can pay our stinking bills. That'd be, nice, but honest. We learn to be kind. And we learn to be nonviolent, not with our fists, but with our tongues as well. And that will help us argue better or disagree well. You see these, so you see Paul, I don't recognize status. I don't recognize dividers. As a matter of fact, I do recognize them, but when I see it, I try to stop it with a rebuke. So you also see Paul willing to rebuke those with higher statuses that would be seen as higher status than his, just because he knows that the truth is very vital. And then you also see equality. And that's when I go like, say what? Like, to a lot of people who don't like Paul. Paul is pushing equality, believe it or not, in a way that people don't see. He is trying to bring two separate groups together. And I would see that I would honestly say to myself, I think if Paul was here today, he would be saying, you know, there's no conservatives and no liberals. You know, we're one in Christ. You know, like Republicans, Democrats, what are you doing? You're going to destroy each other if you don't stop it. You know, I think he would speak truth to us. And I think we would both equally get kind of a roasting there to be like, you guys have to come together. You guys have to compromise. You have to, and compromise comes from co-promise. You have to co-promise with each other. You know, you're going to have to live in the tension. You're going to have to live you're going to have to find the common ground and the, what's the word I'm looking for? Contradiction within the contradictions. And I think that's the contradictions that that the type of thing that Hegel talks about is coming together and finding something different. When you look at the peace process, and I talk about Belfast a lot because I really do love it, but you know, all these different people coming together and having to sacrifice other things so they can be community. And now it's a really amazing place. I love that place. I love visiting. I love being there. It's a great community, but everybody had to sacrifice something in order for peace to happen, for them to not literally kill each other and destroy each other. So you've got Paul saying pretty punk rock stuff here is that I don't recognize status. I stand up to those who try to cause division. You know, I rebuke those who try to cause division. I'm calling for equality. You know, I'm calling for unity. So, I mean, Paul is vital, folks. Paul is vital to the gospel. You know, Paul is vital to the work of Christ, to continuing the work of Christ, because as Christ comes and then we all go, oh, this is what Jesus said. And Paul's saying, you guys got to work this stuff out. So we're going to end, so usually we get through 2 as well. He gets some pretty good stuff, but I think we'll wait for that. So that's another part of Galatians, is the great part of this book that I think is the greatest book written on grace, is this. It's a rebuke letter. It's also his ton of foreshadowing for such a small letter. You know, he's going like, we got to stop this stuff. So he keeps showing like, I've dealt with this. I've argued with this. I've argued with the best of this. I've argued with the most people with authority. Well, I don't respect authority, but even if you do, the authority of the top of Christianity besides Jesus, I've argued this and actually set it straight and rebuked on this behalf, because we have to be a community. And that the law will not save you, that works will not save you, that it is not about those things. And he'll get into that. He'll get into Jew and Gentile and things like that in a few minutes. And then he'll talk about like when we try to do these things that we really nullify grace. You know, that we basically just say, oh, who needs Jesus? Who needs grace? Because we've got it taken care of. And that's what you see is a lot of folks who just, they might give you word service, but, you know, when they start telling you, did you got to do this, this, and this, they're just basically saying, you know, grace isn't enough. You know, inclusion is not enough. Christ is not enough. And that's what they say. So, I'll tell you what, guys, it's getting really, really hard to like this. Well, this is harder to be passionate about when I'm getting so many facts, just like these little tiny areas, and I keep just getting more and more. But we're gonna keep trying. I mean, I'm super passionate about it. I just hope you're feeling it and loving it as well. Hey, so there you go. We're gonna continue to go through Galatians. I'll be back here next week. I'm kid-free next week, so usually if you can tell, like by the way I talk and stuff, because I got my sweet girl Minnie is here at the house. My son went and did some things with his mom today, so it's dad and daughter time today, which is pretty cool. So we're gonna go do some fun stuff together. But yeah, so much good stuff coming up, folks. And listen, we really do need to raise funds. It's just the nature of this church. We've been doing it for 30 years. The message gets better and the budget gets smaller, and that's okay. You know, if that's what I got to do to tell the truth, that is great. But like, if we can figure out ways to bring in finances to keep this church striving, and I just said church. I've been calling it a gathering, but I feel like we're now getting to a place where we got to reclaim some things. and redefine some things. But we are a community. I'll call gathering just so it doesn't trigger everybody real quick, and maybe even myself. But we are 2 or 3 gathered together, and that's what we are doing. And we will continue to do this. And I was really inspired. It's so strange to me. I was really inspired by watching the documentary about my parents. And it's not all roses and sunshine. But what interested me was seeing how many people they were able to build community with through television. And think about this: as we can talk to each other, we can DM each other, we can do all this kind of stuff together, and still remain and be a community. So that's what we'll continue to do. And I'm just open to, like, if we get the budget bigger, I've got ideas, but right now I'm not going to try to sell anything. I'm going to do this if we do this. I'm just saying, like, I had an independent accountant say, this is what you need. If you want to bring on somebody and you guys want to do more and you want to be more efficient, you need to have about 75 grand this year. So that's what we're going to try to raise. I'll keep you guys updated. I hate that I have to keep asking for money. I hate asking for money because my background, my family, but we are a nonprofit, and you do get a tax write-off for that if that helps encourage you. I'm really hoping that we can find somebody to come in and kind of sponsor this whole thing, or at least a good chunk of what we're doing and the work that we're doing. Because we've been forerunners and stuff, and especially amongst like the evangelical places, I was there, and when we were going in saying LGBTQ folks were our brothers and sisters, and we're equal, and there's not a sin there, and we've got to welcome each other. And I saw a lot of people follow that, and unfortunately, sometimes those people don't want to recognize you either, because it reminds them that they weren't always in the same place. So it can be a struggle, but we will continue to embrace and include people and talk about inclusion and talk about the historical facts of Christianity and what Christianity really is, not just traditional Christianity, but we will dig into the scholarship, and we will talk about things that are tough, and we will struggle with that, and we will see things that we have to go, okay, here's contradictions. What do we do with these contradictions? You're always going to get a straight shot here. And I think it's really exciting to look at this and go, oh my gosh, we've got the Apostle Paul, and he keeps talking about no hierarchy, and then the church has been built on this like hierarchical like system of like, just almost like virtue signaling with each other, even on both sides. And it's going, no, it's not about that. It's not about this hierarchy. It's not about virtue signaling. It's about trying to come together in a way that's not very comfortable, but that keeps you from killing each other. And I'd rather you be a little bit uncomfortable with each other and learn to disagree well than destroy each other. And if we do that, then the powers that be can't keep us divided and can't control things the way it is. I mean, it really comes down to even a bigger thing when we really grasp these principles and we really understand what it truly is to be a follower of Christ, to be a part of Christianity. When we really, what is taking up my cross? Taking up my cross isn't judging other people and being horrible and treating women less than. Picking up my cross is having a table for everyone and understanding the importance of that and building relationships and friendships and community with all people of all faiths. It's Christianity's coming in and saying, blessed is the peacemaker. So there you go, folks. Revolutionchurch.com is where you can support us, or you can donate there. You can also share our needs, like that's up on Instagram. You can like that stuff. You can share that. You can like what you've seen today. You can sign up for YouTube and follow us and like our talks every week. You can share these talks on YouTube. You can share them with friends. That helps. You can share you can go on and leave a good review on iTunes or all the different ones that we're on, whatever ones you listen to. You can like our stuff, give us positive reviews, share our stuff. Those are other ways you can really help support the work that we're doing. So it's not just write a check, but writing a check would help the most. But those other things also really help and help get the word out there and continue to help grow this community so we can be self-sufficient community and continue to do new and exciting things that bring us closer to bringing this as a reality to all people, not just our small community, but continue to reach out to other bodies and have maybe some tough conversations that bring us together. All right. Thank you so much. I'll see you guys next week. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed this podcast. To make your 100% tax-deductible donation today, please visit revolutionchurch.com/donate. You can also learn more by clicking the donate section on the website.